It was 10 years to this very day when one of the most hyped up Super Bowls in league history occurred. In this much anticipated matchup, we were to see the unstoppable Broncos offense, led by one of the greatest quarterbacks to ever play the game, go against the immovable Seahawks defense, led by a group of hard hitting, athletic, and oftentimes vocal secondary, better known as the Legion of Boom. It was to be the fifth time a top ranked scoring offense and scoring defense were to meet in the Super Bowl, and up to that point, the top ranked defense won 3 of the 4 matchups, the lone loss being the 1985 Broncos, losing to a 49ers team that's defense was nearly as good. Although history was not on his side, as both the MVP winner and as someone going up against a top ranked defense, many believed that Manning was going to cap off arguably the greatest regular season ever with a Super Bowl win, cementing him as firmly the greatest quarterback of all time. Instead, we got this.
It's snapped over the head of Peyton Manning. A flag is down. They talk about the 12th man in Seattle. Look how Manning is coming up to the line to either make a protection check or...
Hey guys, Cyber TV here, but you can call me Kevin. In this video, I wanted to cover Super Bowl 48, a forgettable game in terms of quality, but an unforgettable one in terms of notoriety. I also want to cover both the 2013 Broncos and the 2013 Seahawks, as both teams were historic for completely different reasons. It led to what on paper looked like the dream Super Bowl matchup, a high-powered offense against a suffocating defense. The reality is that more often than not, those matchups do not create a great product. Why that happens is anyone's guess, but my theory is that defense has always been more about effort than execution, and because of that, there's less game-to-game variation with strong defensive performances than with strong offensive performances. And sure enough, the Super Bowl was a fantastic example of why an elite defense has an easier time dismantling an elite offense than vice versa. On a personal note, the 2013 regular season was one of my favorites, and it was because of what Manning and the Broncos were doing from opening night onwards. The season ended on a very sour note for me, but in retrospect, we were witnessing without a doubt the greatest secondary in league history. A secondary so dominant that it's pretty much impossible for a better secondary to exist in today's NFL, and the league has made sure of it. So back to the Broncos. The Broncos made a surprise playoff appearance in 2011 off the strength of Tim Tebow's will to win. But his will to win was no match for Brady's will to win in the AFC Divisional. And in response, the Broncos were looking elsewhere at the quarterback position, and it just so happened that Peyton fucking Manning was available. Manning had a decorated career with the Colts before neck surgeries had him miss the entire 2011 season, and in response, the Colts had the worst record and had the rights to draft Andrew Luck, arguably the greatest QB prospect ever. The only other candidates for that title are John Elway and, well, Manning. So the Colts had to pick between a certified all-time great, but one coming off a major injury in his mid-30s, or Luck, who was in his early 20s and had a sky-high ceiling. In retrospect, I believe the Colts made the right decision, starting fresh with Luck and shipping Manning's ass to the Broncos, where he got to play alongside guys like the late Demaryius Thomas and Eric Decker, both big, athletic receivers that Manning rarely had with the Colts. The 2012 season started off rough. Manning clearly rusty from taking a full season off, but after shaking the rust, he played some of his best ever football en route to a 13-3 record and a first-round bye. The Broncos then faced the Baltimore Ravens team that was playing with determination after franchise legend Ray Lewis announced his retirement. The Broncos looked like they were in control with 42 seconds left and the Ravens needing 70 yards to score, but then this happened. Yeah, so the Broncos season came to a very disappointing end, and it was now time to retool for 2013. The Broncos acquired Wes Welker from the Patriots to provide a slot presence. They also acquired Sean Phillips, Quentin Jammer, and Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie to shore up the defense. Unfortunately, the Broncos had to also deal with Von Miller being suspended early on for breaking the NFL substance abuse policy, and throughout the season, the Broncos had to deal with injuries across the offensive line. But that did not stop Manning and the offense from obliterating the record books. From game 1 onwards, Manning was rewriting the record books, throwing for 7 touchdown passes against the defending champs, which is a record he shares with 7 other quarterbacks. The Broncos got some revenge against the team that knocked them out last season but they were only getting started. The Broncos proceeded to average 37.9 points per game, scoring 606 points, which is still an NFL record even 10 years later, even with 17 games. In those 16 regular season games, the Broncos never scored under 20 points and only scored under 30 points just 3 times. They scored 49 or more points 4 times. Manning threw for an NFL record 5,477 yards and 55 passing touchdowns, and was statistically the second best quarterback behind Big Dick Nick and his fluky 10 starts. But that wasn't enough to rob Manning of his 5th and final MVP. Keep in mind, the Broncos did this with an average at best defense, Miller missing substantial playing time, several changes to the offensive line, and John Fox missing 4 games due to a health scare. The Broncos looked unstoppable on offense. In the playoffs, they beat the Chargers 24-17, and then avenged their overtime loss to the Patriots by blowing them out in the AFC Championship game. They were to face the Seahawks in the Super Bowl, and speaking of which, how did the Seahawks get to this point? It all started with the 2010 season, when the Seahawks hired Pete Carroll as the head coach. They also drafted Earl Thomas and Cam Chancellor that year. The Seahawks finished the regular season 7-9, but due to how inept the NFC West was, it was enough to make the playoffs. Many did not believe the Seahawks deserved to make the playoffs with a losing record, but that feeling went away when this happened.
Oh, look at this run! What a run! Marshawn Lynch still on his feet. Has blockers now. He's dancing his way for the touchdown.
The Seahawks won against the defending champions and proceeded to lose 24-35 to the Bears. That postseason ensured that Carroll and Lynch were going to stick around. In the 2011 draft, the Hawks drafted Richard Sherman and Byron Maxwell, and also acquired Brandon Browner by free agency. The 2011 team went 7-9 again, but this time it was not enough to advance to the playoffs. And then came 2012. The draft had the Seahawks acquire Bruce Irvin, Bobby Wagner, and of course, Russell Wilson. Now the foundation for the early 2010 Seahawks was set, and it began with the Legion of Boom, the starting secondary for the 2010 Seahawks. The Seahawks had 4 hard-hitting defensive backs, with 3 of them being among the biggest at their position, and Pete Carroll himself was a defensive back in his playing days. He also received help from defensive coordinators Gus Bradley and Dan Quinn, and from secondary coach Chris Richard. The recipe was in place for an historically dominant secondary that set the foundation for one of the greatest defenses in NFL history. On October 30, 2011, against the Bengals, Sherman made his first start, and with it, the Legion of Boom made their first start together. In the 6 games that preceded, the Seahawks went 2-4, and opposing quarterbacks had a passer rating of 86.2. But in the final 10 games, the Seahawks went 5-5, and opposing quarterbacks had a passer rating of 67.8. It was a sign of great things to come. Back to the 2012 season, they finished with an 11-5 record, the top-ranked defense, an elite offense, and a secondary that contributed a ton to opposing quarterbacks, having a 71.8 passer rating against them. In the playoffs, the Seahawks beat Washington 28-14 and then lost to the Falcons 28-30. The defense allowed Atlanta to take a commanding 20-0 lead early on, but were unable to mount a comeback against the Falcons like so many others have. But again, the Seahawks had reasons to be excited about the following season. Last season, they secured their defense of the future, and in 2012, they secured their quarterback of the future. The 2013 Seahawks were even better. They finished with 13 wins, statistically the best defense again, another elite offense, and a secondary that contributed the most to opposing quarterbacks, having a 63.4 passer rating against them. Only 2 quarterbacks were able to end up with a passer rating of over 100, Mike Glennon of the Buccaneers and Andrew Luck of the Colts. Cam Newton was able to finish the game with a 96.1 passer rating, but the next highest was Matt Ryan's 83.3. Other quarterbacks that the Seahawks faced in the regular season were Colin Kaepernick twice, Chad Haney, Matt Schaub, Carson Palmer twice, Drew Brees, and Eli Manning. Some of these were Hall of Famers or at least had a few All-Pro caliber seasons, but the Seahawks defense made them look like they didn't belong in the NFL. In the postseason, the Seahawks beat the Saints 23-15 and the rival 49ers 23-17. It was in this game where Sherman had one of the most notable post-game interviews ever.
You the final play, take me through it.
Well, I'm the best corner in the game. When you try me with a sorry receiver like Crabtree, that's the result you're gonna get. Don't you ever talk about me.
Who was talking about you?
Crabtree, don't you open your mouth about the best. Or I'm gonna shut it for you real quick. LOB.
All right, and Joe, back over to you.
All right, well, we saw.
And thus the stage was set for what was to be an epic Super Bowl, arguably the best passing offense ever, going up against arguably the best passing defense ever, the unstoppable force against the immovable object. History was not on the Broncos' side, as the game was oddly the first outdoor Super Bowl in a cold weather city. MetLife Stadium recorded a 49-degree temperature, 9 degrees Celsius for you non-Yanks, which was the third coldest for a Super Bowl. What's even more odd is that the two coldest happened in Tulane, Louisiana of all places, but in an environment like that, a legendary pass defense will thrive, especially in a neutral field. Unfortunately for us football fans, the game was over as soon as it began, as the Broncos offense immediately gave up a safety, the quickest score in Super Bowl history that set the tone for the rest of the game, as the Broncos offense had no answer for the Seahawks defense. One cannot help but wonder how different things would have gone had the Broncos been healthier, but the Seahawks were without the service of one of their LOB members, as Brandon Browner was suspended for violating the NFL's drug policy. In his place, Byron Maxwell performed very well, and in the Super Bowl he had 4 solo tackles and even forced a fumble. For me, the most vivid memory I have of Seattle's dominance was this play where Cam Chancellor laid a hard hit on Demaryius Thomas. Manning was incredible in the regular season, and heading into the Super Bowl, he was also incredible, but he looked like he didn't belong against this defense. And to be fair, most quarterbacks didn't, but to perform like that on the biggest stage after the season that he had, it left a very sour taste in people's minds. The Seahawks won 43-8, and linebacker Malcolm Smith came away with Super Bowl MVP, a testament to how strong a defense it was that a guy that I haven't even mentioned yet came away with the MVP in a game where all of them were clicking. The following 2 seasons, the Broncos finished 12-4 both years, but whereas 2014 was a dominant offense, 2015 was because of an historically dominant defense that rivaled the LOB era Seahawks. The Broncos won the 2015 Super Bowl, Manning's final game as an NFL player to cap off a legendary career, and since then the Broncos have been inept. Ironically, the starting quarterback for the Broncos right now is Russell Wilson, who, as mentioned earlier, as we all know, was the quarterback for the Seahawks during this time. Meanwhile, the LOB had to retool as Brandon Browner left for the Patriots, but the Seahawks still went 12-4 in 2014 and still had another dominant defense that ranked as the best in the league. Opposing quarterbacks had a passer rating for around 80.4, which was still elite, but not at the level of the 2012 and 2013 Seahawks. To be fair, they faced a better group of quarterbacks in 2014, as you can see here, but the team was not as healthy, especially in the playoffs. They were able to limp to the Super Bowl again and nearly repeated, but then the Malcolm Butler play happened. Remember when I mentioned Brandon Browner joined the Patriots? Well, apparently he played a big role in this play happening. The less we speak of this play, the better. In 2015, the Seahawks went 10-6, but that was because they had a brutal schedule. The offense and the defense were both top 4 that season, but they had to play both of their playoff games on the road, despite being statistically the second best team that season. They beat the Vikings 10-9 and lost to the 51 Panthers 24-31, although it's worth noting that the Panthers began that game 31-0, so it was not actually that close. The Seahawks defense was still elite in 2016, but no longer did they strike fear on opposing offenses like they did from 2012 to 2015. And in 2017, with injuries to Cam Chancellor, Earl Thomas, and Richard Sherman, and then their subsequent departures, the LOB era officially ended. Thanks to anyone that made it this far. Leave a like and sub as it'll help with the algorithm. I did not appreciate these 2 teams enough in real time, especially the Seahawks, but in retrospect, we were witnessing some of the best the sport will ever offer. It's great that both teams ended up winning a Super Bowl in the process. It just would have been much better, for me at least, if the Broncos won in 2013 and the Seahawks won in 2014. But regardless, this was a fun time for NFL history that I wanted to bring up exactly a decade later. Until next time.